Well, thanks, Will, and thanks for everybody who's up early for this first session. We're thrilled to be able to do this now for our 5th year. So never before, though, has this conference been more critical. Since last year, the population of those surviving without shelter has significantly increased. Along with it, its human cost. Therefore, there is no other area of social good that architects can contribute to more than shelter, and shelter is in our DNA. In the last year, since our last Design for Dignity conference, this crisis has been met with strategies and tactics that increase both long-term and short-term housing. We are producing more shelter, from permanent units to bridge housing. But how can we upend these approaches? Or how can we expand them, actually? How can we do so more rapidly? How can we better care for our people? How can we as architects contribute our skills at this time? These needs need to be addressed, and what of these can be changed to allow us for a greater contribution to this cause? These questions from the basis of discussions and information exchange to be led by Michael Lair, FAIA, Wade Killefer, FAIA, and Alice Kim, FAIA, over 3 sessions in the next few days. Before we begin, though, the AIA likes to thank the experts, the policymakers, the innovators, and the housing providers, of course, the community representatives joining us from across the city, county, and country to speak or lead breakout sessions in order to contribute their collective expertise and reduce suffering of those without shelter. Many thanks to those who make the discussions of this conference possible. Presenting sponsors, David Baker Architects, Shimahara Visual, hi Craig, I think I see you in the group here, Egan Simon Architecture. All 3 are deeply committed to the areas of this conference in their own work. And by the way, I think Egan Simon has been a presenting sponsor for all 5 of these conferences. So I think we checked, and thank you for that. And then finally, to my fellow attendees, we look forward to your input during this breakout, all these breakout sessions. That's really the essence of this conference. During these sessions, we will turn discussion and information into action. So with that, I'd like to introduce Michael Lair, FAIA. Michael.
Thank you, Greg, and good morning, everybody. You know, just looking across going through the pages, normally going to these kind of events is like going to a wedding or a bar mitzvah. You just see all these people you know and respect and love, and you can talk to about 2 or 3 of them, but it's just a nice and warm, cuddly feeling. So that's what we're going to have together this morning. Also, I would like to point out that normally at 8:06 on Thursday morning, I'm 1/2 hour into my yoga. So we're right in the middle of the very difficult pose right now, probably a crown pose, working our way towards balancing pose. And Shavasana will be in quite a while. Just briefly to introduce myself, I was born and bred in Los Angeles and live and work actually in the neighborhood I was born in. My background in related to this material, I designed with the downtown homeless drop-in center. It was built 20 years ago and on San Julian Street, and a respite for people on the street. And for 13 years, it operated as a drop-in center with about 3 million visits. And just this past week, we were privileged to work on and finish the Etna Street Bridge Housing Project, which will house 80 people. And I'm currently working on lots of micro units with a really fantastic team, which we call Rethink Housing Los Angeles. I'll also like to say that just my own particular, I don't know if it's a weirdness or not, but 56 years after I decided to be an architect, the word architecture, and the fact that I'm being an architect still has magical qualities to me. Making home is the primal act of architecture, and of architects. So what we're of being an architect. So I think our subject matter is really fundamental to our profession and its rudimentary role in culture and society. So the starting premise regarding homecoming and completing communities, Los Angeles is if not the critical design laboratory for testing and challenging the following: bottom up and top down leadership in community, in government and governance. It is in testing bureaucracy. What are its limits? Those are easy to imagine. But more interestingly and important in this moment, what are its possibilities and how do we work with the bureaucracy to make it be its best self? In finance, what are new models and old models that work? In politics, who does what to whom to make good things happen? And then radical experimentation and making it safer to fail. As you know, today's overarching rubric is catharsis from crisis to transformation and shifting ground. There are 6 words which I think capture this moment, this period, both from homelessness to where we are today. The first are I can't breathe. And then the second, which is it's completely on point, is shelter at home. To be safe, you need to shelter where at home. These are words today to live, die, wallow, or thrive by. Like our sisters and brothers on the street, the ground beneath is shifting for all of us. To use Nassim Nicholas Taleb's phrase, to thrive in chaos requires anti-fragility. That is, amidst this seeming chaos, how can we be our most opportunistic and agile selves now, as individuals, as designers, and as a community, in expediting our desired future, even perhaps a magnificent one? It is perhaps a moment unprecedented in our lives of empathy and openness to action, transformation, and embracing truths that have been elusive and invisible for many. We have been tossed by waves of reckoning. Me Too, BLM, COVID, the fragility of democracy and American promise. Truths are being and have been revealed. But homelessness was a crisis of immense size before COVID. So just for a minute, the background of how we got to today. In the spring of 2019, the former presidents of AIA Los Angeles got together and we decided to welcome the country's architectural community to the annual National Conference Convention in Los Angeles that was to be held in May 2020. And we were going to share our successes and failures as a design community, as a city in dealing with homelessness. The convention didn't happen, COVID intervened. Then AIA Los Angeles decided to morph that mini symposium that we were going to do into our annual Design with Dignity conference. And as Greg pointed out, this is our 5th one, a really central and important now part of our annual calendar and who we are. So with COVID, the subject adjusted, broadened, and then became different. Then George Floyd and so many others were murdered before our very eyes, and the world changed. Community, health, and home were all reframed in almost every city across America and around the world. It has been a real-time national reckoning about true justice and the collective ownership of our past and future. Our conversation thus shifts. What seemed daunting, if not impossible, mere weeks and months ago has happened. Attitudes, positions, implementations have changed in ways that are exhilarating, scary, disorienting, promising, and not. Tomorrow will tell, but being our best selves seems more possible now. As a matter of design, I am asking that we embrace our failures, learning from them and using them to break out of the box. That we celebrate and share our successes, reminding us all that success is indeed possible. And sometimes it takes time and failure along the way. And it will be probable, if we will it to be so, by our actions. As a design matter, we must weaponize our optimistic, result-driven, and at its best, socially potent profession to embrace and overcome this crisis of imagination. It is a crisis of imagination. This trifecta of crisis and opportunity. Trifecta piece number one, homelessness, unaffordable housing. There's the continuum of housing from the untended to people on the street who remain, it remains elusive how we deal with these thousands of people on the street until we get them off, whether it's tomorrow, next week, or next year, to the tended to people on the street, to shelter and to housing. Number two of COVID, of the trifecta, COVID, pain, depredation, loneliness, economic collapse, permanent debilitation, and death now have been seen possible for everyone and in a hurry. How is that different from life on the streets? Well, the time frame is a little different, but the issues are the same. This collective epiphany has shattered taboos. It begins to ignore the downside of taking risks, not to worry quite so much, at least now. I mean, people will get angry, 3 weeks and 3 months from now, and also to the ability to explore radical possibility. 3, Black Lives Matter. New, widespread openness, embrace, understandings of long suppressed and undervalued truths have been unleashed and triggered very much by a racist regime that has come together and we have come together to radically reinvent and hopefully transform our sick society. So with that as a lead-in, I would like to introduce our incredibly distinguished panel, who I'm really excited to be spending the next hour with. They come under the rubric of finance, design, public-private sector leadership, thought leadership also, and action, government, governance, and community. In finance and also design, Tom DeSimone, President and CEO of Genesis LA, a incredibly important community bank. Full disclosure, we're also partners de facto in a group, Rethink Los Angeles, and we're building many housing projects with micro units and smaller across the city. In design, Natasha Hicks, currently at the Government's Performance Lab in Detroit. She's an innovation fellow at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and is a native daughter of Los Angeles. I don't know if Monique King-Veland was able to join us. She was having some technical problems in New York this morning. She's director in state and local housing policy at the Urban Institute, and until a few months ago led housing and homelessness issues for the County of Los Angeles. Our loss of the East Coast Game. In government, we have Heidi Marsden, the executive director, the new full-time executive director, lucky us, of LAHSA, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. In government also, we have Molly Reisman, Housing and Homelessness Deputy Office of Supervisor Sheila Kuehl, County of Los Angeles, and Stanton Fellow for the Durfee Foundation, also with a very distinguished lineage in the nonprofit as well as governmental sector, dealing with taking care of us and getting people housed. Also in government, Sean Spear, the Assistant General Manager of HSID, the Housing Development Los Angeles Housing and Community Investment Design Department. Great pleasure to have him. Very busy man in these last few years, taking care of us. And Pete White, the founder and executive director of Los Angeles Community Action Network, a critical community leader who speaks truths and changes our world. So what I've asked the panel to do is to spend a few moments, and I think we can do it in a leisurely way. Who are you? Number one, what do you do, and what is your relationship to home and homelessness and lived experience that might be relevant? Also, I've asked, since we can all get into trouble in sometimes good ways and sometimes not such good ways by the words we use, are there words that matter? Good ones and bad ones and unspoken ones? Can we articulate and go beyond coded language and cut to the chase? And then your take on the roles together and or apart of the public and private sector in this social project that we are all talking about. And then what a takeaway before the end of our conversation. I've asked each person to articulate an action item. What must we do to make it safe to succeed? And I think that's important. Many of us know in our own ways what we need to do to succeed. The work in a civil society and the work, if we really want to make things happen, and we know this as architects, the respect we have to give everybody if we want them to participate in making projects happen. How do you make it safe to succeed? That, and for those of us who've spent time working with the homeless community, and also under the rubric of harm reduction. How do we make it safe to take risks and fail? How do you meet people where they're at and help them be their best selves? And then, of course, the action item to take away, it might be related to process, movement, a movement, law, interventions, if an intervention, of whom, by whom, further convening, on whom, who to include, and perhaps who to exclude, probably no one to exclude. And then finally, please identify and remove blockages. And frankly, I would ask these questions of everybody participating. You can write them in into the chat room. Also, for each of the speakers, please hold each other accountable. When a compelling idea or initiative or philosophy is expounded, please comment and point out what will prevent it from happening and what it needs to succeed. And with that, I'd like to begin to invite Natasha Hicks to be our first panelist.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Can everybody see my screen? Yes? Okay, great. So good morning. Thank you so much, Michael and AIA-LA, for inviting me. I am incredibly humbled to be sharing space with the other folks on this panel, and I'm really excited about kind of digging into this incredibly layered brief for this conversation. My name is Natasha Hicks. I am a native Angelino, but I am currently working at the City of Detroit's Housing and Revitalization Department. So my work with the city at a super high level is focused on programs and services that are aimed to increase housing stability in the city. And my work over the past few months has really been centered around the city's COVID response and thinking of ways to try to help prevent Detroit renters and homeowners from becoming housing insecure due to the economic crisis that is accompanying this pandemic. And before I worked for the City of Detroit, I actually started my career in architecture and now exist and work within the space of policy, but still very much identify myself as a designer. So I hope to kind of speak more about my work in Detroit and kind of bring my experiences with the housing department to our dialogue and the Q&A. But what I wanted to do with my time today as the kind of resident architect on the panel is really interrogate the question around design's role in this trifecta of crises. And my immediate response when I heard about this brief was that the kind of through line that connects these three topics is that they're all born from the same systems of injustice. And it may be a helpful starting point for our conversations today to think about design's role in systems change. And it's my belief that design has a really critical role to play in systems change, and I wanted to kind of offer up a new framing for this. So I wanted to start by bringing you back to the summer of 2015, when I was working as a junior architect for a small residential design firm in New York. I was working late one night and I took a dinner break to look through the news of the day. It was July 15th and it was the day of Sandra Bland's death. I remember looking at my double monitors side by side, one with the news and images of Sandra Bland, and the other with a CAD file open of the $20 million unit that we were designing, and thinking, this is not why I wanted to become a designer. See, for as long as I can remember, I've been grappling with this question: how can I use my agency as a designer to address systemic injustice? And it was on this night in July of 2015 that I knew that my current professional path was not leading me any closer to answering this question. So I ended up pivoting and going to graduate school for urban planning, where I continued to grapple with this question. And what I found kind of over and over was that within the design disciplines, both in academia and in practice, we are really limited by our definitions of what design is and can do. Typically when we think of design, we think of homes and shelter, buildings. We think of the built environment and the material. But within this frame, I found it nearly impossible to find examples of design that went beyond addressing the symptoms of injustice. So these are things like housing segregation or the income gap, inequities that we see expressed in our built environment. So for example, these three topics that we're interrogating today, the COVID crisis, homelessness, police brutality, these are all symptoms of a much larger fabric of systems which our nation was built upon. And I call this framing for design for triage, meaning we are designing to alleviate the symptoms of injustice rather than addressing the underlying systems. And I believe that as a discipline, we're kind of trapped in this space of Band-Aid solutions and incremental change. And what I found myself striving for, and what ended up being the topic of my master's thesis, was a framework for design that addressed the underlying systems of injustice, such as racism, capitalism, colonialism, these kind of root causes of these trifecta of crises that we're facing today. And I referred to this framework as revolutionary design, which, if you look to the definition of revolution, is a sudden, radical, or complete change, which I think speaks to this kind of transformative work that can be accomplished through design, or at least I believe can be accomplished. So for time purposes, I'm not going to go too far into my thesis, but through that project, I did end up unearthing kind of 4 basic principles that I wanted to offer up briefly as a proposal for the role of design and designers when looking to systems change. So the first idea that came from this framework of revolutionary design is to inhabit a space of design practice where we work to simultaneously dismantle systems of oppression at the same time that we create and nourish spaces of liberation that do currently exist. So for example, as a designer, I can be supporting the defund the police movement by creating images and graphics for them. And at the same time that I'm doing kind of that dismantling work, I can also be creating spaces of liberation. So for example, I think of spaces like the Afropunk Music Festival, or I think about the Black in Design Conference, which was a conference that I co-chaired back in 2017 and was a convening of about 500 Black and Brown designers. And to me, those are spaces of liberation that were designed and created. And the second idea that emerged from this was focuses on design superpower, which is the imagination. We have the ability as designers to create a vision for the future that is free from systems of oppression. And I think about world building like Wakanda as a really incredible utilization of designers' imaginations and as a way to have conversations about creating a world with different systems. And then third is this idea of the collective and coalition. So I think it's critical to understand that no one person, no one design firm, no one local government is going to alone be able to dismantle these systems that we live with. And I think oftentimes designers find themselves at the nexus point of a lot of different sectors and stakeholders. And I think it's important to kind of elevate our role as conveners to build these coalitions. I think about this process kind of like conducting a piece of jazz music, you know, where you have a bunch of different sectors and perspectives coming together in this beautiful dissonance. And lastly is this idea of what I call a utopian praxis. So this means that our definition of design becomes inclusive of other practices beyond designing the built environment. So this kind of systems change design includes designing things such as new ways of living, new organizational structures, new conceptual infrastructures that align with visions of liberation. So I put out examples such as the Green New Deal, or I think of organizations such as Cooperation Jackson in Mississippi, which is looking to build a solidarity economy, as two examples of projects that kind of fit this expanded definition of design. So I know I just threw a lot out there on the table, but I wanted to put these 4 ideas out there. The idea of using design to dismantle systems of oppression and nourish spaces of liberation, elevating the importance of the imagination and our role as conveners in design, and expanding our definition of what a design project is as a way for us to think about expanding our thinking as we think about these very complicated crises over the next hour. Also, you know, we're living in a moment with this trifecta of crises, which is requiring us to take risks and think really boldly and really engage with systems level work. And as I kind of wrap up, we were all asked to think about language, which is clearly very important to me, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And when I think about the words that I hold as super important, it's words of aspiration. So words like imagination and liberation, which become the words that are part of my center of gravity. And when I think of harmful language, I think of terms, and I think about the way we use language to avoid talking about these underlying systems. So for instance, I think of terms like resilience or vulnerable, words that really put the responsibility on the individual rather than the system that has created the space of oppression that that individual lives within. And so I'll end with my action, which is a call for you all to engage with these 4 ideas and kind of ask yourself what resonates. Where do you feel like in your practice you can more fully engage in systems work? And I ask you to really think about your gifts and talents as designers and how you can challenge yourself to be more oriented around system change in this extremely and very difficult moment. So with that, I will turn it over.
You really set the scene. Really,
yeah, not a lot for 8 a.m. I'm sorry, y'all.
No, I think this was, it's going to be helpful for the rest of us. I think you've sort of taken where we began and I think articulated in ways which are exciting and important, and sort of wrapped it, you know, in the envelope of design in ways which are if not completely new, pretty darn new and clarifying. So with that, let me go to Tom DeSimone. And Tom, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me today. As Michael mentioned, I'm with Genesis LA. We are a nonprofit community loan fund, CDFI, and we invest in a variety of different community, economic development, and affordable housing projects. And we really try to focus on projects and urban interventions that are doing something different, and because of that, they cannot access traditional capital, whether that be from the banking sector or from government. Before this role, many years back, I actually worked with Sean Spear, I think one of our other panelists. I can't see him on the screen yet. And it was an exciting time. It was when I was right around the time I first got involved in this work. And in many ways, it was the last time that homelessness was on the top of our radar. If you recall at the time, Steve Lopez was spending every night on Skid Row, and he'd write a column each morning in the Times about what he'd experienced on the street. And it's a reminder of so many things about the importance of the essential role of a civic newspaper like the Times, but also of the need to have these things elevated, these conversations on everyone's front burner. And I think we're in another moment like that, as Michael set the stage for. Michael asked me to talk a little bit about finance and the role that we play in that sector. We provide a number of loans to different affordable housing projects. In fact, the one behind Molly, the beautiful image behind Molly, is one that we have financed. We provide a lot of pre-development capital to these projects, which is very challenging to come by, particularly for projects that are being built in public-private partnerships. We've also been taking, I think, a lead role in supporting a number of the quote-unquote innovation projects that have been coming down the pike through the HHH Challenge and work with the United Way and others who've been trying to lift up new models and new approaches. As Michael said, one of the ones we're most intimately involved in is the Rethink Housing Initiative, and I'll share a few images of some of the work that we're doing, which is really to Michael's credit, since his firm has been the leader on the design front. And the Rethink idea is rooted in a few different principles. One is of constant learning. As many of you are probably familiar, the regulatory environment and the incentives to support affordable housing are changing constantly. And so there's a constant learning and relearning of the rules around the development of affordable housing. And so our team is this integrated team that has moved from project to project with a developer, Restore Neighborhoods LA, Genesis on the finance side, and Lair Architects on the design side. And we've been able to sort of vertically integrate the various components of getting a project done and go from site to site and project to project. A second value that we've brought to this model is to streamline things. So as you can imagine, when most projects go about development and financing, they might go to a certain funder to acquire the site, maybe a different one to get pre-development financing, someone else might provide construction loans, and somebody else might provide the permanent financing. And Genesis LA realized early on that to be innovative in the space, to take that risk at the front end, you need to know that there's financing there to get you through to the finish line. And so we partnered with this group, Rethink Housing, to basically say we will provide the financing at every step. And so this is sort of again, a streamlined financing model to help us be able to take the risk that Michael was alluding to and to continue to learn and push the envelope. And then the last piece I would highlight is that we've really focused on smaller sites. This is a perfect example of one. This is in Compton. It was a former County of LA site. And we feel that so often affordable housing has been focused on very large projects, and that there are so many opportunities on smaller sites and at smaller scale that can really open up the siting of affordable housing and the neighborhoods that can become part of the solution to this crisis. And I guess with that word, to the direction of Michael and thinking about words that have different meaning and the importance of words, I think the word crisis actually is a word that we should be really thinking hard about. And I think since the onset of COVID, crisis I think has taken a whole new meaning. And when it comes to homelessness, before COVID, I think many of us wondered if in the next 10 years we would make a significant dent in the homeless crisis. And within a matter of days, there were these bold plans to house 15,000 people in hotel rooms. And in 10 weeks, we might make a significant dent in homelessness. And it's debatable whether we're going to achieve that ambitious goal. But I think it's set the stage and it's set a tone and a new expectation that if we use the word crisis, what are we really doing differently? What bold steps are we taking to truly meaningfully move the needle on what we're calling the crisis? And so I think that there are potentially, the world looking forward, we may have a different set of expectations, a different level of expectation when it comes to defining crisis and responding to crisis. I wanted to acknowledge that there's been, a lot of success. I think it's easy to get bogged down and a bit demoralized about the weight of the homeless crisis in Los Angeles. But despite some of the setbacks and the challenges in moving forward, there really has been quite a bit of success. As many have been following, the state has been tremendous in sort of from a top-down model of forcing localities to change their zoning. And I know this is controversial for some, but it has been tremendously helpful to opening up the channels to being able to develop affordable housing and permit affordable housing. And a lot of the NIMBY factor that has prevented this in the vast majority of the state for so long. I think another success, and one that's often maligned in the papers, but HHH has its challenges, but it is a tremendous success. Before the passage of HHH, the city was permitting or creating something like 300 permanent supportive housing units a year. And in 2.5 years' time, 8,000 units were approved. And I think it's a testament to government for being able to process that in such a short period of time, that volume of work, to the development community, many of them nonprofits, by the way, stepping up and adapting and being able to push that through the pipeline, and the urgency and the sense of innovation. Like I alluded earlier, the United Way has been behind this. The city of LA boldly put out a housing innovation challenge. The county did the same. I think there's a yearning for different ways to go about this. And so that brings me to the finance piece and some of the areas that, maybe failure is too loaded of a word, but areas where we need to keep striving for success. I think in crisis, we need to maximize flexibility and opportunity for flexibility, to reimagine what is possible. And traditionally, I don't know that the affordable housing sector, particularly on the finance side, has really been set up to maximize flexibility and possibility. And so, I wanted to point out a few of those areas that we could continue to push for change on. One of the challenges with financing is that affordable housing almost always involves some level of government funding. But the government funding is very much a one-size-fits-all tool. You may need a small amount of public sector support, but when you use that support, it triggers a whole host of requirements that might not be proportional to the benefit that's being provided. And that can really hamstring your ability to implement different approaches, to reduce cost, to be creative and innovative. Another piece is that whether it's finance or land use tools that we've put in place, they trigger long-term affordability covenants, which in principle is a very good thing, but it also can challenge your ability to bring in private financing and other sources of capital because you're subjecting the building to very long-term affordable rent restrictions, but many of the subsidies that come in to help people pay that rent and thus support the operations and the financing of the building are not 55 years. They can be anywhere from 5 years to 20 years, depending on the funding source. And so there's a mismatch between how do we operate and pay for the operations of affordable housing, and how long do we need to make it do something, i.e. being affordable. So there is a mismatch there that I think limits our flexibility in terms of raising different types of capital and bringing different types of practitioners into the space. You've probably heard about some of the discussions on the rental subsidies that have been a key part of making the 10,000 unit goal that the city has put out there a reality. And that is definitely a fix. I think we really should be looking to ways that we can put more robust and stable rental subsidies into the market. And I think that will really be a key to unleashing more innovation in the space. And I think we should also be thinking about, are there ways that public funds can operate on more of a sliding scale? That if you take 10% of your capital from the government, maybe there's only 10% of the rules that you have to follow, so that there's a little bit more proportionality and flexibility in what you can implement. Yeah. The other area that very much impacts financing are the rules, the government regulations. I think something that's been very much a learning experience to our team on the Rethink Housing front has been that by right doesn't always mean by right. Interestingly, a lot of the state laws, and including the TOC ordinance here in LA, some of the by right features, such as density, the number of units on a site, or parking rules, you get completely ministerially. But when you're packing more and more units on a site, you're running up against height limits, you're struggling to find enough open space to accommodate on the site. And so you're triggering a need for concessions on that front, and those are discretionary approvals. So these things are almost inherently attached at the hip, but when you pursue one by right, it's oftentimes triggering a discretionary process. And many will point to, oh, no big deal, the planning department will approve it. But it's $10,000 to file for this. It's months to go through a process. It can be appealed and add on more months. And so I think there's this disconnect again between really trying to streamline process and how we actually execute that. And this greatly affects the financing because it's adding costs and adding time to projects and risk. And the other thing I think is worth pointing out is I think we have layers and layers of process that we should really take some time to look back where we can streamline things. Just as a point of reference, we have one of our HHH projects. We're trying to demolish a abandoned property on the site. It's taking 6 clearances from the city, including the former redevelopment agency that hasn't existed for 6 or 7 years. So, I mean, these things are really paralyzing progress in many ways, and I think there's really a need to revisit some of that. To sort of wrap up, I guess, in reference to the action item Michael asked for, I think my action is to really clean out our closet, and it kind of builds off that last piece, which is there are many rules and regulations, and many of these are important, but I think in our rush to reform things, we've added layer and layer and layer upon layer. And I think it behooves us to go back and see what we can strike from the list of things that we need to do. And I think this is of great importance. It's something that's completely in our control. I think that it's something that doesn't cost a lot of money. And in a resource-constrained space as we're in, it can really save a lot of money as well. We could be redirecting planning staff or building and safety staff to process more projects and get them permitted faster. So I think this sort of house cleaning or spring cleaning within the process realm is a place we very much should direct our attention in the immediate term. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Tom. And again, a spectacular overview of the challenges and opportunities, and one which I think is extremely valuable for really everybody at the conference today. I just wanted to, both in terms of Natasha's liberated relationships, I think we have a liberated relationship in Rethink Housing, and I think the big idea is we have to behave as if we're all on the same team. I mean, in society, and these and working with people who and coming together with people who we maybe didn't even know exist. So partnering, all of us, I think, is a important and a big idea. Did Monique make it today from New York?
Monique is not going to be able to make it. She has no power, so
Okay.
she has no way to get on the computer. So
But
she's
she has no electric power. The power she has, unfortunately, isn't going to get her into onto our screen today. Okay, let's move on to Heidi. Heidi Marson, Executive Director of LAHSA, Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen briefly just to go over a few pieces. So again, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I wanted to go through just a couple core elements around LAHSA. LAHSA, Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, is the central coordinating agency for the city and county of Los Angeles around homelessness. So we think about homelessness as a system. We administer funding on behalf of the federal government, the state, the city, and the county of Los Angeles, and really do the work in making sure that our response is coordinated, that we're driving equity, access to services, and facilitating outcomes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the landscape and then answer a few of the questions that were posed to all of us. So as of this year, LAHSA facilitates the annual homeless count. So this is the count of people who are experiencing homelessness on a given night in January. It's a snapshot over the course of the year. And as of this year, we saw a 12.7% increase in Los Angeles County with just over 66,000 people experiencing homelessness. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Of course, these results continue to frustrate all of us who are doing this work collectively. We want to see this needle move in the other direction, and we know how to do it. And we've actually had some really great opportunities to practice that through COVID-19. What we also continue to see, and we can't talk about homelessness without talking about systemic and institutional racism. Year over year, we see that Black African Americans are overrepresented in our homeless population, not just within Los Angeles, but across the entire nation. This year was consistent with what we've seen, where people who are Black African American represent just over 33% of the homeless population, compared to representing only 8% of the LA County population. So we see right there that there is a disparity, that individuals, Black African American, are 4 times more likely to experience homelessness. We know homelessness is not monolithic. We know there's no silver bullet, but it is factors like this and systemic factors that are very deeply rooted in our systems locally and nationally, frankly, that need to be undone before we can really see things change fully. We have to be questioning our own policies, our own practices, to make sure what we're doing is not perpetuating the disparities that exist. So one thing we've seen is that homelessness was a crisis before COVID-19, but COVID-19 brought us an opportunity to really take the crisis response that we've been wanting to bring to this issue, coupling it with unprecedented resources from the city and the county of Los Angeles and the state and the federal government, as well as the political and public will to get people inside to literally save lives. So we estimated that there are about 15,000 people in our population who are highly vulnerable to COVID-19, meaning that should they catch or contract COVID-19, they're very likely to become hospitalized or pass away. So the state of California initiated what they call Project Roomkey, and LAHSA has led, in partnership with the city and county, LA's response to that. So we have, in a very short period of time, within 2 to 3 months, we secured collectively 35 hotels and motels across the county, and have sheltered more than 6,000 people through our collective efforts to get people indoors. What this showed us, though, that was the most important piece, is that when all of these other resources come together, we can activate and we can move much faster than we ever thought we could. We knew we could move quickly and we knew how to do it. We knew what it would take, but we had no idea that we could move that quickly. And so we're at a really pivotal moment right now where we've built a lot of momentum. So what we don't want to do is get to a point that when the COVID crisis goes away, that we go back to business as usual and the landscape on the street goes back to business as usual. So we're thinking really hard and working hard to make sure that we keep the momentum and build it forward. And again, our Project Roomkey efforts are really targeting folks who are over 65, have chronic underlying health conditions, but it's been this incredible lesson for us because in addition to how quickly we could activate, we see people want to go, people want to be safe, people are scared, they want to self-isolate, and we need to give them the opportunity to do that. So it's been a really incredible initiative. So where do we go from here to make sure that our efforts are built upon and that we don't lose the momentum? LAHSA developed the COVID-19 recovery plan that really focuses on this population. And we have a commitment, in addition to the city and the county, that nobody who's been sheltered through our COVID-19 crisis should return to the street. So how do we take these resources and use them to actually rehouse people? Again, so we don't go back to the status quo. That would be such a missed opportunity. We need to quickly house 15,000 of the most vulnerable, and that could be through an interim or a temporary solution. Ideally, it's through a permanent solution. So our recovery plan contemplates what that looks like and what it would take to do it. We need to curb the inflow to homelessness, which I'll talk about a little bit. And also really thinking about how do we prepare our system for the future. So if and when something like COVID-19 happens again, how do you take an issue like homelessness that's already a crisis and then apply more crisis on top of it? How do we make sure that our system as a whole is prepared to address it? As I said, what happened through COVID-19, we moved faster than we could, but it was a really heavy lift. And so we want to make sure we're building the capacity longer term so we can continue that effort. And of course, we need to ensure that racial equity lens in all of our efforts so that what we are doing is not perpetuating disparities that exist within the homeless system. So the last piece that I just wanted to say, and I really appreciated Natasha's framing about homelessness as a symptom of many other really large causes. Again, we know there's no silver bullet to solving homelessness. We know it's not monolithic, but we know that we can solve homelessness and we can end homelessness because we caused it. Our system continues as the homelessness system to grapple with this thought of how do we actually solve this crisis when there are more people coming to our front door every year than we're able to actually lift out of homelessness. And as an example, last year on average, there were 207 people every day who were placed into housing. And at the same time, 227 people every day on average fell into homelessness. And we see that mismatch year over year. And those people who are falling in are folks on fixed incomes who literally just need a couple $100s a month so that they can stay housed and stay in their unit. They're families who work full time, but they just can't afford rent at the rates that are within Los Angeles County, and there isn't the affordable housing. There are people who are mentally ill or physically ill who can't afford to live. And so by the time that folks really reach our front door of the homeless system, there are so many big systems that have failed them over and over. And so until we continue to look holistically at all of that and all of those collective drivers that are bringing people to our front door, we can have the best system ever, and we continue to outperform each year. We're rehousing more people, we're sheltering more people than ever before, but more people are coming in. So I just challenge all of us to think holistically about this issue because there are a lot of systemic factors that need to be undone over time. And to the challenge that Michael gave us around language, especially with this crisis, language really, really does matter. Homelessness and talking about people as the homeless or, homeless people really refers to them as some other group. It's not something they are, it's something they're going through. It's an experience that people have. Nobody wants to be homeless. And there are a lot of narratives and a lot of stereotypes and a lot of assumptions that are placed on the population based on what people see. So we need to work really hard to undo that and to think of these folks as our neighbors, to think of this as a social, a racial, and an economic injustice that has driven folks and really, frankly, human suffering. And that's something that we are fighting at LAHSA every day, is the public perception of this challenge and recognizing that there's a lot of tensions within the housed population and just how do we address this issue at the scope and the magnitude that we have it here in LA. But again, just continue to call it how you see it. Homelessness, and especially chronic homelessness, is the result of many failed systems and many failed experiences. So we know how to solve it and we know what to do, and we just have to remain committed to doing it. And I think the last thing I'll say is, although the numbers are disappointing and we hate the numbers that we see, we do continue to see our system perform better year over year. And I think that's the hardest message, is that you see folks in Los Angeles County and voters throughout the county who have really stepped up to tax themselves even and say, I'll pay additional funding to support homelessness. How is it possible the numbers are still going up? So we need to continue to tell the story about all of the inflow and the driving factors that are pressing people into this situation, so we can maintain our commitment to funding the issue and to permanently solving it, not just putting a roof over people's head in a temporary way, but actually rehousing them and making them a part and reintegrating them into the larger community. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Heidi. I guess again to reiterate the need in life and in this set of issues of carrying multiple contradictory thoughts at the same time. The other thing in terms, and it relates to time, and you know, architects live in a different time frame than normal people. I mean, we really do live in terms of years, you know. I mean, you get a permit and that's exciting. Somebody clears the site, that's exciting, a big deal. You chalk out the layout of the building, all of these things, and you know, wow, it's only 18 months until it gets done. So we are naturally more tolerant, or we are hardwired, otherwise we would go nuts, to live over a period of time. Normal people, you see a problem and don't understand 3 weeks later why it's not solved. And I don't mean to be dismissive of the sense of urgency and crisis, but again, these are simultaneous ways of understanding sort of where we are, why we shouldn't be here, and but we are moving in that direction. Thank you, Heidi. That was terrific. Let's continue in government here to the great Molly Reisman. And Molly, why don't you take it away?
Great, thanks, Michael. And thank you for this amazing panel. I've just been really enjoying this morning, and Tasha, that was the most amazing opening. So thank you for starting us off that way. So Michael asked me to talk a little bit about my background. So I do work for LA County now for County Supervisor Sheila Kuehl, but I've worked in a bunch of different environments on these issues. I started as a peer advocate and later a social worker, and then went to graduate school for urban planning. I worked for Skid Row Housing Trust for a number of years. So I worked on the side of building supportive housing, and then went to the Corporation for Supportive Housing, where I was a lender and a funder. So I've worked on this through a few different angles. And the reason I went to government in 2015 was because I think sometimes people forget where we were in 2015. It was really bad. There was no money to build housing. Redevelopment had gone away, Prop 1C was exhausted, the city wasn't putting general fund into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I mean, there was literally no money to do this work. And Michael wanted me to describe what I do for work. So the first thing I do for work is I find money. That is my job. I find money, whether it's for an individual project like Corazon de Valier, which is the project behind me in my virtual background, or whether it's for something big like Measure H or our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That means we also have to set policy about where does the money go, who does it get distributed to, what are the parameters. Every once in a while, I get to work on writing a law like rent stabilization, our current eviction moratorium. We're about to pass inclusionary zoning for the unincorporated areas of the county. We're only 20 years too late, but we will soon have inclusionary zoning. But I think to some of the things Natasha brought up, I think the most important thing that I feel like I do in my work is I find and support good people. Because government is risk averse for many, many good reasons. But, you know, that is the nature of government. And it takes finding people and building trust and building really strong relationships in order to break outside the mold and to innovate and to lead in a different way. And so I find that I spend a lot of time just trying to nurture relationships, just trying to nurture people who are doing amazing work, who are willing to take those risks, and who are often getting quite a bit of blowback um, from our political system when they take those risks. I think folks don't recognize what people doing this work are up against, and it's physically challenging when you have so many people attacking you from so many different angles, which is the nature of working in government. It is the public sector, it's very public, and people are gonna come after you no matter what you do. And so it takes an army of people supporting each other to create change. So in terms of the question about words that matter to us, I thought it would be helpful just to talk through just my very personal sort of evolution on these issues. So I started getting serious about housing policy in 2003, 2004, and that was the era of the 10-year plans to end homelessness, which were started by my good friend Nan Roman, who I adore, who's a brilliant thinker. But at that time, we really thought we were going to end homelessness, and that it was just a matter of when, not if. Like, it was going to be done. And one of the tenets of the 10-year plans to end homelessness is that we had to close the front door to homelessness. We knew exactly, like Heidi said, that our issue was inflow, that, permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, we have really effective models to get people off the streets. The issue is how many people fall into homelessness. And at the time, we thought people fell into homelessness because of systems failures. That when you looked at people who became homeless, they'd often been in the foster care system, they'd been in the military, they'd been in our hospitals and our jails, and our systems had failed them. And so if we could fix those upstream systems and stop them flowing people into homelessness, we'd be fine. And I think to Natasha's presentation, what my personal evolution has been is that, like she said, those systems, the jails, the hospitals, those are just symptoms. Those are just the tip of the iceberg. And I think I was reading the amazing piece that Nicole Hannah-Jones wrote in the New York Times Magazine a few weeks ago about what is owed. And she used the phrase America's death pact with white supremacy. And I would just say, I think for me, that is a really grounding principle, because it's not just our hospitals and our jails that are broken. It's our entire economic system. It's bigger than our economic system. It's our values as a country are so profoundly broken. And to bring this back to homelessness, like, we keep thinking like, if we just create this new program, our homeless count will go down. And poor Heidi, because every year, Heidi has to get up in front of the press and say, sorry guys, our homeless count went up. And it's because we're not gonna end homelessness with programs. And I love building projects. I got Corazon de Valle behind me in my background. Like, it's really important. And every time we build a new permanent supportive housing site or a new bridge housing site, we are saving lives. And that's incredibly important. So we need to keep building, but we're not going to build our way out of this. We have to focus on civil rights. We have to think of housing as a human right. There has to be a legal entitlement to housing in our country, or the homeless count's never going down. Like, stop beating up on LAHSA. It's not about LAHSA. And we keep sort of being like, oh, it's this person's fault, or like, oh, it's Mayor Garcetti's fault. Like, that's ridiculous. Our system is really broken, and our homeless count won't go down. We won't end homelessness until we fix these much broader values in our society. And so that's really led me to stop talking about ending homelessness and to talk about housing justice. That is the frame that we have to work from. And if you look at countries where there aren't a lot of people who are homeless, it's because they have a legal entitlement to housing. That's our only hope of really changing this system. So I'm going to stop there. I hope we will talk about housing justice, but I'm loving listening to everybody. So I'm excited to hear some more speakers.
Thank you, Molly. Yeah, me too. I'm loving listening to everybody as well. I just wanted to say something about risk. Risk is a big idea for me, and I think, as architects, the risk one takes to be an architect is so ridiculous, in terms of just bringing a little beauty and light into the world, but that's what we do. I think the big idea of risk, though, is that when we say we want to take risks and try new things, if failure is not a possibility, then it's not risk. And if there's no pain, it's probably not failure. And that's really hard for any normal person to embrace. And the challenge is that in the middle of a crisis, people say, why is this taking so long? Let's go ahead and do this. And then someone takes the risk. And 3 months later, when something goes a little wrong, not even very wrong, their career will be destroyed for having broken a rule. That is our conundrum. We have to make it safe for all of us to be in this together. And I think this breaking down of barriers and enlarging the circle of regular communication between all of us, you know, I mean, it's like, well, you know, unless we solve the larger problems of society, well, if we're not talking to the people who are involved in the larger problems of society, it's not going to happen. So let's go on. A perfect segue to Sean Spear. Sean is at the one of the leaders of the city housing agency, and deals with the good, the beautiful, the bad, and the ugly. And so, Sean, take it away.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. So, yeah, I think we've heard some really amazing perspectives, as well as understanding of the crisis that we face with homelessness and trying to address it as a phenomenon within our society, and specifically here in the LA region. For background on myself, I'm the Assistant General Manager at the Housing Department in LA. I focus on housing development programs. And so while my bureau has 24 different programs involved with, needless to say, the one that we spend most of our time with and focus on is HHH. And so we have traditionally, as a department, been a funding source for the development of housing. And while we sort of see ourselves in a somewhat as just being part of an overall apparatus of agencies, philanthropic institutions, developers, professionals, especially architects amongst others, and other funders on the public agency side, to really focus on providing new housing and preserving existing affordable housing within our communities, HHH is a life unto itself. And so we have really focused on it as sort of a triage method, and really bringing in other groups within and units within our department to address this. So it also involves our land development group, which focuses on city-owned land and putting those out for RFPs. It also is our bond unit, and that's the way taxes and bonds are many of the ways that the housing is financed. It's really been a sort of all hands on deck effort. For me, as background, I started off in architecture in undergrad. I think, like quite a few folks, you find that you love architecture, but you're not necessarily the most talented architect. So like quite a few, I ended up switching majors. I did my grad work in planning, was the city planner for my neighborhood that I grew up in Brooklyn for 5 years. It was the most amazing first job to have and I felt like I was whistling as I went to work every day. I was so happy to be able to make and affect change within my community. But I was what most developers would describe as a meddlesome planner. I asked a lot of questions about development, asked a lot about realizing, and I think I came to realize that planning is great for thinking about things in a holistic manner, but the actual doing is really left to developers and professionals, including architects. And so when it comes down to it, I realized that I wanted to be a doer rather than someone who just thought about the best ways to kind of approach it. So I kind of graduated into doing development work. I was a project manager for several years, both in public and private sector. Started to focus on finance as a background, and really all of those different career paths for me have informed my approach to this work right now and today. So I try to look at things very holistically, but also look at, okay, how do we actually implement the things that we are trying to do? the solutions that we have come up with as a collective body. So our department is really focused on permanent housing, so in permanent supportive housing specifically these days. So we liken it to a three-legged stool. You are doing both the bricks and mortar of building supportive housing, and that's kind of more so our role. But there's also rental subsidy that's needed for the families and households that move into this supportive housing to bridge the gap between even the affordable units and what they actually can pay based upon whatever income, or if they have income at that point when they first move in. And then the third piece is really the supportive services, which is critical to stabilizing folks and setting them up for the best way possible to not only be in a better position to take hold of their lives, but also frankly to thrive and go forward in their lives in a positive way. So for us, we tend to really try and, our strategy is to focus on partnerships, on speed, and on funding. And really, I put funding last because it's really the partnerships that, and recognition that the city doesn't do it all alone, that we have critical relationships with the county, with our housing authority, with the philanthropic community as well, and especially the developers who are working to both develop and build this housing, as well as to operate it after the fact in a successful manner and in a way that's integrated into the communities that the properties are located in. So behind me, as an example, is one of our projects that's about to finish up. It's Aria Apartments. I think that what people in the communities get pleasantly surprised about is that we do take the time to design them very well to make sure that they really serve the needs of the folks that live in the property, but also that they're good neighbors to the surrounding communities as well. So to some of Michael's challenge questions, which I appreciate, you know, I think there are words that are really important in our language, both internally, and as many of you know, every profession has its own language and its own acronyms, and it's sometimes you know, real alphabet soup to try and understand what they all mean. For us, the big things are the notion of temporary versus permanent housing, with the department playing more of a role on the permanent housing side. So, but at the same time, we have a deep partnership with LAHSA and, you know, Heidi's group that focuses also on trying to figure out ways to do temporary shelter and housing in a very creative and supportive manner. So we tend to try to lend our expertise on that side as well. I think more in the abstract, I think an important thing for people to think about is their concept of home. And homelessness and the lack of home really means more than just the kind of roof over your head and four walls around you. You want to think about it more than in a literal sense, but in the concept of what it truly brings to somebody's life, that it's stability, that it's your foundation for doing the things you want to do in your life. It is the notion of being, hey, and to me, having a home is almost as important as having family. It is your means it's your home base, it's your sanctuary, it's the place that at times can be your place of wealth building, particularly if you are fortunate enough to own your own home. But most importantly, it provides stability and the basis for you to do the things you want to do with your life. It is a fundamental need. And I think I echo Molly's point that it is the success in dealing with eliminating the possibilities of homelessness in communities is where they take it seriously enough that they treat it as a right. So for the much as possible, I've realized that my focus in my career and being on housing side has really been about trying to provide that to people, that their home becomes the thing they think about and worry about least, that it's just there. It's something that they accept. And I think for many of us that have not experienced homelessness, it's almost like breathing. We realize that it's something that we just take for granted until we can't. So I think going forward, you know, we tend to focus on recognizing that the funding is last, that it's the partnerships, and it's also the speed. And I would emphasize that tends to be the thing that gets perhaps the least amount of lip service, is you know, we've passed an amazing amount of legislation, both on the local level and the state level, to help speed the development of housing. And, you know, to Tom DeSimone's point earlier, we really ramped up essentially a whole new industry within the city. Prior to the passage of HHH, we were doing about 300 units a year, as he mentioned. There were really 8 developers that were doing work in this space. You can count them on your fingers. So for us to take that to where we are today, where yes, we have 8,000 units in the pipeline on just the HHH side. We also have another 1,000 on the non-HHH. So that's where we're still doing the production of using the existing resources that we had been using towards supportive housing. And that's really where our work is going to be going forward, because we pretty much essentially committed all of the HHH dollars to projects. The other thing to keep in mind is that we have attracted huge amounts of resources, huge amounts of interest amongst folks to help in this effort. As I mentioned, there were essentially 8 developers that were doing supportive housing before HHH. Now there are 43 that are participating in HHH. I think it is a tremendous response that we've had, not just traditional supportive housing developers, of course, but also traditional affordable housing developers, and even market rate folks that have come back into this space that had previously at one point or another done affordable housing before. It's a recognition of how much is needed to be done, and the fact that the industry has stepped up to do so. What I would say is probably some of the challenge that we deal with, or what I wish we did better. So I'll be the first to take up the mantle in terms of thinking about where we perhaps have fallen short or failed. The first thing is, frankly, telling our story. I think it is, I think if more people knew the level of involvement and the creation of this sector that is in this city, they would feel a little bit more comfortable about where their money is going. You know, we're blessed that the voters approved both HHH and Measure H on the county level, which are essentially self-taxation for the sake of trying to address this issue. And I don't think we do as good a job as we could in telling the story of where that money is going, because it is really going to changing lives, to building an industry that can effectively meet the challenges that are ahead of us. As Molly points out, we have huge numbers of folks that are falling into a homeless situation, unfortunately, even though we are making great strides in trying to address the folks that are in that situation. Homeless prevention is a critical thing. And I think that's one benefit that has come out of this COVID crisis, is that I tend to look at it as trying to put in place Rahm Emanuel's statement about never fail to take advantage of a chaos. So we have made provisions to go electronic, both in terms of draws, in notaries that are required for documents approval, for things that are designed to help make it easier for projects to go forward. It's a shame that we were not able to do that earlier because of lack of will by some folks, recognizing the need, but not being willing to let go of their part of the process. I would say at the end of the day, that's where the blockages and the things that I would most want to change is that kind of mind shift of folks to realize that sometimes your best way of helping this effort is to get out of the way and to let go. And it's really challenging. And when I first came in to come back to the department and saw that we were really kind of spinning our wheels on getting that first call for projects under HHH, I said to the staff, okay, look, we have $1.2 billion available essentially right now. We can get the project started. So you know what, we're just gonna make the commitments. We're not gonna underwrite them. We're gonna give everybody a head start, put them in the best position possible to then leverage that commitment with other sources of financing on the state level, with the private investors through the lenders and the tax credit investors, or whatever means they're using to finance the projects. And my staff were like, what do you mean we're not gonna underwrite them? What do you mean we're not gonna do a competitive program? And I was like, look, we put the money out until we run out of it, and then we'll deal with that later. But if we can put it out right now, let's do it all right now. So we were non-competitive for the first 2 years, and that was unheard of for us to run things that way. I think there is the need to also recognize that there are opportunities for folks to feel more comfortable that the properties and the projects at the end of the day will be well built and well maintained. We have a very sophisticated industry. There's not necessarily as much need for everybody to touch each deal as they think there is. So to me, at the end of the day, if I can work as much as possible to both increase the level of resources that are needed for this effort, to make sure that the resources match the intent that people have in saying that they want to support the creation of affordable and supportive housing in particular, but that they need to put up, frankly, the resources in order to help make that happen. But it's also, in my mind, it's at times the need for people to recognize that they can have a little bit more trust that the projects at the end of the day will be good ones and really good neighbors to them. So I'm going to stop there. I know there's going to be hopefully some good quick Q&A to be had, and I'll be sure to add some additional comments at that point.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And actually, the reason good news matters, as Sean points out, is not about necessarily feeling good, but frankly, in communities, these become self-fulfilling prophecies. If you think nothing is happening, for instance, you don't vote for the next HHH bill because, wow, look, nothing's happened. So this is what hasn't happened, but this is what has happened. So I think that's important. And last but not least, I'm very happy to welcome Pete White, who is one of the critical leaders in our city, in our community. Critical as in incredibly important and illuminating. And Pete, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me this morning. From the space that I sit, it's just, it's almost an out-of-body experience to hear a conversation in an architectural conference that's rooted in structures and systems, an analysis of structures and systems and inequality. And so for that, I'm humbled to be here to share. I think I want to start my just really brief remarks off by a quote that I happen to love by Louis Kahn, your colleague, who says, "A street is a room of agreement," right? And a long street is a succession of rooms, right? And so when I think about that, like a street is a room of agreement. And then when we talk about terms, homeless, which I don't use, I talk about houseless, because I understand, as LAHSA data continues to point out, that the vast majority of houseless Angelenos come from Los Angeles. Los Angeles is home. The fibers, the culture, the relationships, the ability to breathe and not be one of the 3 people per day who die as a result of being houseless in Los Angeles. I looked at your questions, Michael. Yesterday was my birthday, and so I really got to, so I wasn't around, I was off of social media, and I'm looking at the questions for the very first time, and I was like, woo! And when you said them at first, I was like, I can't remember all of that. So I was scrolling furiously to find them written down, and I found them, and that's good. And I just want to say, who am I? I'm the son of educators, a native son of Los Angeles, right? I am the cousin and the nephew of laborers, right, who fled to Los Angeles in the 40s and 50s, attempting to get away from the same repressive regime that we are confronting today. They were the workers who worked in the steel mills that are in those abandoned factories up and down Slauson Boulevard and Alameda Street, right? That was dismantled as a result of deindustrialization, right? They would be some of my family would be individuals who had to take advantage of a then very fragile social safety net, and now a barely unnoticeable social safety net. I would be the cousin of numerous and the neighbor of numerous Black bodies that were forced into cages as a result for not rebuilding the jobs that were lost during deindustrialization and building cages instead. So builders were busy in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, but not constructing housing in our community, but constructing cages. And this is where we find ourselves today, with protests in the streets, interrogating and re-examining the ways in which resources have been spent, right? There is a lot of talk about there's just not enough resources, but we would argue that there are resources, but the priorities for those resources have been cast in a framework of carceral communities and not a framework that lifts all boats. So I am the founder and the executive director of the Los Angeles Community Action Network. It's a local grassroots organization that has had consultative status with the United Nations for the past 7 years, because we understood that, one, housing must be a human right, and two, we must have a system of economic development that does not miss communities that have been abandoned. When you think about our organization, if you think about it as a three-legged stool, the three strategies that we employ: one, community organizing, which is much more than protests. I will have you. This is the process of building an organization that embodies the will and spirit of its constituents. And sort of the tools and tactics and strategies that we use, of course, electoral engagement. So it was houseless and very poor folks on the ground in Los Angeles that ran electoral engagement programs that passed both Triple H and Measure H. We made nearly 1 million calls and about 250,000 contacts for both of those campaigns in order to get nearly $5 billion of resources brought to the community. The second stage, or the second strategy we employ, is community improvement. We don't think it's enough to simply organize against and build power and sort of push for policies and then implement those policies for decades after decades in hope that they will bring material change in our communities. We think it is also important to create our own models, because we find that government is more responsive when you're taking them something that has been done already, right? When we think about our policy work, our affordable housing policy work, and our hotel moratorium work, I would love to say, yes, we came up with that ourselves, but we looked at other municipalities that had did something similar and imported that to Los Angeles. And so on the community improvement side for us, we felt that it is hugely ironic that we have a building, a wellness center in downtown Los Angeles in Skid Row, that's a stone's throw away from the produce district. Like, I can look out my office and see fresh produce. But the fact that Skid Row residents did not have access to that produce did not sit well with us. And so we created a network of neighborhood gardens, right? And we teamed up. And when we talk about this idea of broadening the community, right? We teamed up with local farmers, the same farmers who do business with Whole Foods, and was able to negotiate deals with them that for pennies on a dollar, we could import non-GMO organic produce and feed and keep folks in Skid Row healthy, right? But then on top of that, also forcing the city of Los Angeles to force farmers markets who bring fresh produce to communities to accept EBT, electronic transfer benefits, right? Because why would you have fresh fruits and vegetables but not have access for people who need them most? The second community improvement project, and if you look at the screen behind me, is a community design. So we're not just organizers. Like when you're an organizer, you're kind of like an architect, you're kind of like a lawyer, you're kind of like a judge, you're kind of like a counselor. Behind us, you will see a design that right before COVID-19, a housing design right before COVID-19, that we were gonna break ground on. And so, as I said earlier, we've been fighting for decent housing policy in the city of Los Angeles for 2 decades, right? We've been fighting to bring the cost, and no one's really talked about cost a lot, but we believe that it is a crime that a unit of permanent supportive housing costs to the upwards of $700,000 in the city of Los Angeles, in the region. We can do better. That is far too much money. And so as we do in community, we started looking for models. The hat that I'm wearing is from a company called Icon. It's a 3D printing company based in Austin who's already doing disaster housing in Central America. And so as an organizer, we organized Herb Wesson's office, the Building and Safety office, the Office of Building and Safety. We brought the labor unions together and we took a trip to Austin, Texas, to talk about what it would take to bring 3D printing to Los Angeles, right? So not waiting, right? Not waiting for people to say it's okay to do it, but proactively going to Austin and learning that it cost $2 million to set up the printer. But then once the printer is set up, that it only costs to the upwards of $10,000. And we knew that our friends in labor, they were kind of shook because they could not find themselves in that equation. So we took them with us to let them understand that, yo, the houses still need electricity. That's a job for you. That the printers only build the walls, and so carpenters still have to construct the roofs, right? And that we still need to do community design, right? And we said that it is imperative that we bring these types of solutions. And so we can talk about HHH and we can talk about Measure H, but we have to talk about bringing the cost of housing and building housing down. And so we went and acquired a lot in South Central Los Angeles on Budlong and Imperial. It's an acre lot. And we found architects who were willing to partner with community and do a proper co-design of what we're calling the first eco-hoods Los Angeles, right? Where we're bringing in, this site won't have 3D printing, but it will have another modular design type of unit on it. And so this is how you bring together communities, right? The architectural community, the finance community, community residents, and all of the agency that they have to see new North Stars, right? About what is possible. Now, I'm gonna finish really quickly now, Michael. I'm gonna go to your actual questions. I'm gonna run through them really quickly. I think the words that matter to me right now, the words that shake us right now, the words that we don't want to hear. We don't want to hear words like patience and process and study and pipelines. Like, we're sort of tired of those words. I know it was King in his letter from the Birmingham jail in 1964 that says, wait for the Negro means never. I'm gonna say that again, wait for the Negro. And so wait for poor Angelinos mean never, right? And so we have got to now be in the practice of doing and not studying. We have studied a lot, right? We talk a lot about broken systems, but in my scholarship, I learned that broken systems are systems whose outcomes cannot be measured. We have a measurement of all the ills. We know how many people are going to be houseless. I mean, even in this conversation, we're not talking about we're talking about post-COVID numbers, but COVID is here to stay. We're not talking about the studies just released from the amazing Gary Blasey, who has done a modeling that says on UD Day that the eviction process is going to, at a low, force 150,000 more Angelenos into houselessness, and we need to be prepared for that in such urgency that it is crazy. We have to not be afraid of words like revolution, and thank you, Natasha, for starting us there. Revolution, the radical shifting of the mind, the radical shifting of the ways that we understand and believe in things that can happen. What we know now in this COVID-19 moment, in the George Floyd, which is just one name of many names, protest in the street, that folks in this country and across the globe are exhausted. The narratives that have been sold to divide us are no longer working. We have no one left to save us but ourselves. And that there's room and space for everyone on this call and in every community to come together, to look for new North Stars, right? And to bring everyone in. That world is possible. Harm reduction, quite honestly, when we're talking about housing and houselessness, harm reduction to reduce the 3 people per day who are dying is simply providing housing and not lip service. It's simply looking at all of the state-owned, the city-owned, the county-owned property that can be retrofitted for housing, right? And making that happen using the adaptive reuse ordinance and not taking no for an answer. The time is now. We can do it. We will do it together, y'all.
Amen.
And so again, thank y'all for having me. Apologetically, I'm gonna have to dip in a second because we're gonna be on an hour-long panel on NPR to talk about these exact same things, about what it's gonna take to bring us all together.
Okay, well,
Thank you
good.
guys.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks so much. Thank you all. Will, I think we have a little time left. I was concerned. I was actually chastised a little bit for having too many good people on the panel. The good news is I'm a very biased observer, but I found today's presentations extraordinary and illuminating in a way that I have not been illuminated, that they have not been illuminated in one place before. Will, do you want to go ahead and in our remaining many minutes bring up some of the questions from the community of listeners? Will or Corinne?
I think we might have lost Will. We just have time for a few questions, and then we're going to show a video. But let's go to Linda Lux, who's had her hand raised for a little while. Linda, if you want to unmute yourself, you can address the group.
Hi, thanks for calling on me. I have 2 questions, so I'll just throw them out there. One is, how can we support each other's projects when we run into walls of opposition? At the conferences that I sit in on, and I'm not an architect, but I work for Venice Community Housing, and we have a lot in the pipeline, and we run into walls of opposition. So how could we help each other is the first part of my question. And the second part is the opportunity I see, but as I said, I'm not an architect. Is it feasible to look at the empty commercial and retail spaces that are going to be available, that are available because people are not going to go back into offices? Is that an opportunity economically to be able to adapt them for housing uses on a long-term basis? So thanks for calling on me.
Okay. Do you have anybody who wants to take that?
I'll just start.
Michael, sorry, go ahead, Molly, please.
Well, I'll just quickly say, that I think in terms of Linda's point about how we support each other, community organizing is really important. I think that's the most effective tool we've found to address the obstacles, particularly the neighborhood opposition. It's a different piece when we have opposition internally in the bureaucracy, but the neighborhood opposition, the community organizing is the #1 tool to affect change there.
Yeah, I would maybe just add to Molly's statement. There is a hopefully very quick story, because there was a supportive housing project that was being proposed next to Hancock Park, and the neighborhood council there turned it down as a recommendation to planning. There was actually then a group of residents of Hancock Park who organized themselves to say, that is not us. We are supportive of trying to get people off the streets. So I think some of it can be grassroots. Other times it's the notion of, certainly we have, the inventory of projects that are underway right now. If you wanted to contact us, we could share those with you, as well as who their primary developers are, who I think would welcome some additional help in terms of community outreach. The last thing I want to say just very quickly about adaptive reuse, that is something that actually one of our Innovation Challenge recipients, Brilliant Corners, is looking at. Opportunities to take office space, opportunities to take unused commercial frontage, and actually convert those into units. So we're very excited about their work and the possibility of seeing that as something that can be replicated across the city in terms of usage of non-housing space and being able to adapt it for additional housing resources.
Yeah, I also think that as in every project, I mean, you basically have to have an attitude of love and embrace to everybody, because you have to engage them with respect and withhold judgment. For those of us designing projects, this first tranche of projects over the past year and the next year or two are incredibly important to show that completing communities and having people who happen to have been unhoused in the past and are now housed in your community is a good thing, and it makes your neighborhood better. It's the burden of design and architecture in the most conventional sense to be projects that enhance their communities and that actually affect people's attitudes, like, oh, where the hell was my mind when I thought that having my sisters and brothers who used to be on the street as my neighbors was a problem? So in this period, it's incredibly important. And I think talking to people who you assume will be against you with respect and engagement over the long run, and that's how you build a community. I mean, I think that's the deal. Corinne, next. Do you have a minute or two more?
Let's go to Josh, and in that note, breakout session leaders, I would maybe leave now and just get your room started. But Josh, if you want to unmute yourself, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, thank you for curating the panelists, starting with Natasha and ending with Pete. That was good shit. Thank you for that. My question is, well, first of all, I refuse to believe that affordable housing is a funding issue. Like, America, specifically Los Angeles, is not broke. Like, if we just stop bombing the Middle East, we can solve the homelessness crisis. So for me, this is a morality issue. And so my question is, how can we create collective empathy among our community to actually solve this? Because I mean, like, I work in affordable housing, and it's going to take like 3 years to start from permitting to building. Like, that's just how it is. And I don't want to sacrifice our design. I don't want to deliver anything less. So I don't want to make it cheaper. I don't want to make this in less time. I want to give our time because they deserve our best. So how do we create empathy so that people will understand that this will take time and that we need to be in this for the long run? Yeah.
I would actually say that the silver lining of having houseless people all over the city is that it's in everybody's face. And frankly, as it should be until it's solved. If everybody was just in shelters on Skid Row, no one else would give a shit. I also think maybe one piece of silver lining of having this racist, quasi-fascist regime leading our country, is that we as a country have learned that there is so much embedded racism in this country, and that if we don't pay attention, we are in the process of losing it all. Hopefully this 4 years will be that wake-up call to build empathy. And I think that if we look at the response to Black Lives Matter in the last 2 months, I mean, people centrists and people significantly right of center are saying things and talking in ways that are unprecedented in terms of understanding the crisis of our country and empathy. And I think as architects, our job is to take shit and turn it into gold. And I think that's our gift to society. And I think there's a lot of shit going on, and the opportunity to broaden the circle with our work, both in our buildings and in our way of thinking, as is evidenced today, is the way you leverage and build on the empathy that is building in a really an unprecedented way, I think.
Josh, I really appreciate that question. I think it's really important. You know, when you think of resource allocation and funding in governments, it's really a question of our values, and where we put our money is kind of where we value. And this idea of empathy, I think as designers, our biggest asset is the ability to visually tell stories and tell narratives. And I think the unpacking of narratives and myths that we have lived with in terms of white supremacy for being embedded in the society, and thinking of how we can look to narratives to maybe try to change hearts and minds in this moment. I mean, it is incredibly difficult work, and it's going to take a lot of time and investment on our part. And I think it's really about us looking to that and valuing that process in order to really have, as you're saying, this really cultural shift.
Michael, this is Will. I don't want to cut us off short, but you know, I want to make sure that we get everyone transferred over to their breakout rooms, and then we can come back and do some concluding remarks and a few more questions. But the breakout rooms, we have 10 of them. There's a document that I've posted on the chat feature, but also if you're using the Hoova app, you can you know, access them that way. We did anticipate that this would be a little confusing. So, Karine, are you there right now?
Yes, sorry. I'm still here, but so I'll just give you guys a quick rundown for the breakout rooms. I put it in the chat. If you're going to be in breakout room 6, just stay here. We have to keep this one live for people joining late, and so that's why we have that one here. We only have 10 Zoom accounts, so that's why we had to keep that one as 6. All the other rooms will share the links in the emails, so leave this meeting and go to the room you want to, and then after your breakout session, come back to the main meeting. I know it's a lot of going back and forth, but that's the only way we can record the breakout room sessions. Unfortunately, Zoom doesn't have the feature to record breakout room sessions when it's just within one Zoom. Other than that, I think that's about it. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and just ask us live right here. But otherwise, please pick your session and stick around and come back at the end, because we also have some videos to share.
What time is the end? What time should people come back?
The breakout room sessions are supposed to end at 10:15, but since we're running a little late, let's make sure the breakout room sessions end at 10:20. And then we'll make sure that we wrap up this day by 11 o'clock. We'll just give it some buffer at the end.
Okay. Please, everybody stick around. Our community is well present here. All these terrific architects and friends of architects.
Excellent. And so if Mark and Dana are here, they're going to be hosting this breakout session. I'm going over to Michael Anderson, so I'll see you all in a few minutes at 10:20. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Mark, I'm just testing audio. You there?
We can hear you, Dana.
Okay, great.
Oh, there
I'm
we
going
go.
to stay on
Hello.
this one with you guys.
Great. So I guess we can start.
I would wait just a little bit. I think a lot of people are definitely just hanging out in this one. Michael, are you going to stay for session 6 or are you going to go to a different session?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'll just say it just in case anybody else is at a loss. I'm a little overwhelmed.
Oh, with where to go?
Me too.
Yes, I'm a lost soul.
It is a lot. So let me just review one more time. So, Lorraine, I'm going to get to your question in just a minute. I just saw in the chat. So the links were sent in the video for the breakout room sessions, and it's a separate Zoom link from the one we're in right now. So you would just need to leave this session and go to the room that you want to go to be part of that discussion. So Will, in all of his emails and my emails, there's separate links to those sessions.
Okay, yeah, right. Okay, well, I'm sure everybody else is more capable than me, so don't worry about me.
Okay.
I stay here because it's easy.
All right.
I'm sure you can add plenty to this session, Michael.
Yes.
I'm looking at the email.
Yep.
With the link in it to this meeting, but I don't see links to the breakouts. Am I just not scrolling down far enough, or what's?
Yeah, scroll down all the way to the bottom.
Okay.
This
I
is
see
the
them now.
one
Okay.
I made a mistake in my email. Yep. So
Okay.
leave this one and then go to a different one.
All right. Well, I think I'll just
stay here if you want to.
I'll stay here for the time being while I look at the. But now I see where they are. So thank you for that. But I think I'll stay here for the time being.
Okay, Mark and Dina, I'm happy if you guys want to start this one.
Okay. Welcome everyone. My name is Mark Lehman, Lehman Architects. Leading this session with Dana Sales of 360, a land use consultant that we work with a lot on affordable housing projects as well as market rate projects. So I think between the two of us, me being the architect, her being in more of the policy side, it kind of covers everything that we're trying to discuss here. So this session came about a month ago when Will asked me if I wanted to come up with some topics for Legislative Day on how to find ways in public policy to speed up affordable housing and identify what some of the roadblocks are, and more importantly, what the solutions to them are. And then 2 weeks later, he asked if we could make this a session for the Design for Dignity breakout session. So we've been scrambling a little bit trying to put this together, but hopefully we can get some good comments and incorporate them into what we're trying to put together here. Again, the ultimate goal is that some of the stuff goes to Legislative Day and actually makes real changes. And there's a real emphasis on trying to not only identify the problems, but really what the possible solutions are. So I'm going to share my screen here.
Mark, maybe while you're doing that, I'll give a little bit more background. So it's nice to be here. Mark gave a quick introduction, but for those of you that don't know me, Dana Sales, I run 360, and we're a full service land use entitlement, lobbying, community engagement, and permit expediting firm. And I think our office is probably more active in affordable housing projects, permanent supportive, shelter in place policy, really on a policy side than any other land use firm in the city. It's a huge passion for all of us. And so we're really excited to be here. I think as Mark goes in here, when we were prepping for this, it became very clear that it's very easy for us to complain about all the things that are wrong and all of the things we experience, because that's the easy part of this, identifying all of the problems in all of the cities and all of the jurisdictions. And I think what we want to try to do today is kind of talk through a couple of the things that we've been noodling, get some input from you all about issues, you know, in terms of focusing today, and then really working on solutions tomorrow. And we want to try and keep this more away from, right, forgive my line, from just a bitch session, because that's very easy to do when we're talking about policy and particularly the city and all of the obstacles we all face. And we really want to try and focus on what can we as professionals do to provide reasonable solutions that AIA can promote. The other part of this is, particularly in the city of Los Angeles, as they're going through housing element update, a lot of the things that we end up discussing really have an opportunity to get, to actually get incorporated in a meaningful way as they're going through general plan update. And so there's a lot of opportunity in time right now. So kick that back, Mark.
Thanks. So like Dana said, it's really easy to get lost in just finding the problems, but as you think of problems, try to also think of what might be the possible solution to it, and I think it'll help us move forward faster. So in some of our talks, we had to really kind of condense this or break it into smaller topics and try to back up and what's the bigger idea here, rather than a bunch of different issues. And the first thing was really identifying what the goals were here of innovation and implementation. And just in a basic essence, it's reduce cost and time, increase predictability of process. I think there was a lot of talk about this today, even from Michael Lair, and also allow for innovation, alternative living configurations, alternate construction methods, complex solutions, because that's where we see things start to get trapped. As soon as you go in the gray area of dealing with any agency or public policy, now you're into something discretionary and you have to deal with something else, and it ends up taking longer. You might add, you know, a whole different process with hearings, and that's where the system unfortunately starts to slow things down. And then really just kind of breaking this again into just simple issues or more global issues of what it is. Really what we're finding the problems are is the procedures, is how things are processed through the city, and then ultimately the policy. And we've separated policy into two different things for entitlements, separate from dealing with building and safety, basically permitting. There's a lot of overlaps between policy and procedure, and there's a lot of overlaps between entitlements and permitting. But we thought this is the way we felt it was best to break these up. So I'm going to just start with some of the things that we have down, and then I'd like everybody to kind of give their ideas of you know, what they think might be other possible problems and the solutions to them. So some of the things we just started with,
Mark,
follow the law.
Mark,
Yes.
hey Mark, real quick, just for everyone as well, feel free to also use the chat and we can address questions and issues as they come up there, you know, as we're talking. So just
sure. Now this one, out of procedures, this is entitlements and permitting, because we're talking about procedures. The one was follow the law, and Dana, this is one that you came up with. So in R2 zones and the issues there. So I prefer you talk more about this one.
And I was kind of scanning the attendees. You know, we definitely have a lot of design professionals. For those of us who are kind of on the policy side, we're living in a time right now where there has never been more legislation coming out of particularly the state to streamline the production of affordable housing, permanent supportive housing, and special needs housing, both from you know, encouraging projects with all kinds of development incentives, as well as CEQA streamlining. And it's really the first time, you know, for the past couple of years, there's really been this aggressive push to just do what is necessary to facilitate housing. So I think the question for us becomes, if there's all this legislation that is helping to create housing, why is it still taking so long? Is really the crux of the issue. Why is everybody still having the kinds of issues they're having? How come the cities just can't get behind a lot of things the other breakout sessions are on, which is product is getting more creative, yet building codes haven't caught up to them. Or they don't fit within traditional zoning because it's a new product, and yet the cities can't figure out a way to allow you to move forward with something that they've never seen before. And so what's happened at the state level is that there are various streamlining laws that have essentially mandated that cities allow the production of this kind of housing, but their zoning codes may not be caught up to that mandate. And so we just keep getting no. And so one of our number one objectives here is that if cities would just acknowledge that their hand effect, follow the law, a lot of these projects could move forward in a much faster form.
And then I'll move on. Communication is another big topic we've been discussing, and creating communication between departments. Because what I think we all find is no two departments are communicating with each other. When there's an issue with one that conflicts with the other, you get bounced back and forth between the two, and it's really hard to get the two departments together in one room, other than the case management unit, which was a great thing that has helped resolve this. Sorry. Allow applicants to be part of the decision-making process. Allow for dialogue, so that decisions aren't just being made behind closed doors. Allow the applicant to be part of the dialogue so they can better express what's going on, and maybe weed out some of the solutions these decision makers are making that aren't going to work. Availability, consistent protocols. This one's a little bit more in building and safety. I don't know how much it is in the planning department, but it seems even within one department, for instance, the fire department, there's a different way to get a hold of each person in there. Some people only take phone calls. Some people only take emails. Some people pre-COVID required you to literally go into the office, sit there, take a number, sit there to set a meeting with them for a future meeting. And so it's different within each department on how you deal with one. And at the same time, their review process is different from one person to the next. And there's, it really should be the same process within the fire department or building and safety. If one person, if we're marking up drawings and writing certain comments, then everybody should be doing that same process and following the same protocol, not everybody doing their own thing, which is what it is right now. Advocacy, I briefly mentioned the case management, which is a great thing that the city started quite a few years ago. The only issue with that is that as soon as a project gets assigned a plan check number, case management is hands off and they're not really helping you anymore. Really what it needs to be is somebody consistent, the case management unit manager, to continue with the project all the way through so they can speak for the decisions that were made in that case management unit. And this goes to the next line, project shepherds. Somebody who shepherds a project all the way through from beginning to end and can get different entities to meet when they need to, or at least on a phone call together. Ideally, this person is appointed from the mayor's office and can speak on the mayor's office behalf, doesn't have to check in with them, so they can resolve issues really quickly. Another thing, internal peer review meetings. So individual departments can learn from each other, which I don't know if they do that right now or not. I know building and safety, all the departments meet once a week. I don't know exactly what they're meeting about, but this is another idea. System efficiency, incentivize all staff towards shared goals.
Mark, maybe before we go there, let's pause for a second, because you just kind of mentioned a lot, and as we start to get into efficiency, we may start to gear towards solutions, but maybe I'd like to actually open it up to any questions, issues, ideas that people have experienced on their own projects, whether City of LA or other. A lot of this is City of LA specific, because I think that's where we have inefficiency.
I can zoom out so people can see everything
on the phone. But maybe before we keep going, we should open it up to questions.
Josh has a question.
Issues.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if this is a question, but more of a concern. To add to this list, there's also items regarding TCO. So, for example, I'm sure other architects have faced this. I'm trying to get TCO for an affordable housing project right now, actually, and I got pushed back 2 weeks. There's no construction tolerance. Like, TCO is being held up for affordable housing. These people who are formerly homeless can be in the building right now, but something is 1/8 of an inch off, like a door clearance is 1/8 of an inch off. And things like that just aren't realistic. And besides that, there's also, you need to satisfy numerous funding requirements, like NOFA requirements, ASHID requirements. And so there's just a list of requirements. And the issue is, especially with ASHID, and nobody knows what they're looking for, and they're trying to get a third party out here, and that third party is in Chicago, and they're actually gone now, so they're trying to get a new third party. So I guess a hurdle that we're facing is just there's a lot of ambiguousness in regards to funding requirements, and those funding requirements are delaying TCO.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm not sure if that's the question, but just like something that I wish we could clean up somehow.
Well, I think the TCO comment was a good one. I actually added clear definition of what is reasonably required for TCO. Somebody, that can make that decision, right? It's like you said, something's 1/4 inch off. That doesn't prevent you from habiting your unit.
Yeah, and just for example, apparently like bike parking is a condition of TCO. Like bike parking, guys, really? So things like that, and it all seems like it's dependent on the inspector.
Right.
Maybe
clear protocol.
Right. I think the TCO issue is one end of the spectrum. The other end that we've spent a lot of time talking about are the challenges just to getting permits issued right now. Perfect story that's timely. Our staff at the right now trying to get an RTI for 100% PSH project that the department is supposed to fund at 1 o'clock today, so that they don't lose the reproduction spot for their prefab housing. We haven't had a fire inspector in the office all week. Our plan checker only works Tuesdays and Thursdays. We had to get the mayor's office to call in a planner to come stamp plans today, so we could actually get an RTI so that the housing department could fund, so that they don't lose their factory. None of that should happen. There was no flexibility on the funding date. There was no flexibility on the factory date. And we couldn't wrangle anybody to actually get permits. So right now it's all hands on deck. And we're sort of at the whim of whatever's going on. Part of why I bring that up is that one of the main things that we have been really trying to advocate is for, city, county, whatever jurisdiction you're in, these affordable housing projects need to have definitive priority processing, and they need to have plan checkers and staffing who understand these are at the top of the stack, and we shouldn't have to call in the mayor's office and the council office and more and anybody else we need to get somebody to show up to stamp a set of plans. And I think one of the other things we're seeing is that because affordable and permanent supportive housing projects have become so prevalent, the stack of them sitting has become so large that they don't have enough staff to just process them. So it goes on the front end as well as on the occupancy end. We have the same inefficiency issues that have to get remedied because it's a big impediment to being able to start, particularly when funding is at risk. And that's the element that does not apply to a market rate project, is that funding deadlines and when they have to fund, when you have to pull these because you have 180 days from issuance of your tax credits to start construction, somehow that timeline and that urgency hasn't been passed down to the building, because 180 days, as we all know, to get building permits right now is an almost impossible task. But we have to, because they don't have the funding to pay for the permits until they're issued their credits, and then they have to start construction within 180 days. So where is the city helping to ensure that that timeline is adhered to?
So I think we had addressed that with the idea of the project shepherd. And then also, Dana, under target staff, right? Specialized staff that only deals with affordable housing, not, everybody does everything. So somebody that does usually plan checks commercial is doing this project. Also increasing staff authority to make decisions, more staff, right? Fund more capacity.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I was just reading the chat just to see anything.
Oh. I missed that.
Agreed. There's just some questions about, just some comments about inspectors and TCO, just sort of echoing.
Could I make a comment quickly on just on words and our use of terms? There are some people in the chat room who are not practitioners. I know what a TCO is, and we're talking about a temporary certificate of occupancy, but I'm not sure what a RTI is, Dana. And so maybe in our conversation, rather than using acronyms, we should use the more common terms.
Absolutely fair. So RTI is a ready to issue on your building permit. So essentially, once you've cleared all your conditions and all your corrections, they issue you a ready to issue, which is essentially what the contractor needs to go in and physically pull the permit.
Got it.
And a ready to issue form is what is required for most of the funding sources to release their fund. You need to show that you are ready, and anything short of that is unacceptable. So there's always this last minute crunch when we're trying to get proof of ready to start construction related to whatever funding source has to show that we've got proof, right? And the coordination between the housing, usually HSIP is involved, and building and safety, and whatever third party, funding sources need that. And that is, there's really two hurdles for affordable housing funding. One, entitlement ready, which means you need to show that you have unappealable entitlements, which is usually the first hurdle to even apply for tax credits or ASIC or whatever funding source, is you're ready, right? Readiness from a standpoint. And then the second hurdle for the funding is you're ready to issue, which shows you're ready to start construction. And just as in the there is zero flexibility on either of those fronts. You can't be in the middle of an appeal process. You can't have an outstanding one stamp that's show up to stamp the plans, right? Can't be any deferment of fees. Sometimes a lot of these companies have to go out of pocket to pay for extraneous plan check fees, because nobody will stamp a plan until they receive a check. So some of this procedural stuff potentially could use a little bit of flexibility when funding is at risk. But it's all of those things. It goes to, I think what Josh was saying, is that there is zero tolerance and there's zero flexibility. And nobody is suggesting that we're sacrificing public safety or the quality of the work or anything like that. We're talking about procedural things that could use a little bit of wiggle room.
So there's a couple comments from Pablo on here. The housing they are promoting is not the one we need. Also, the inspector and the plan checker have different opinions. Yeah, you definitely can get inspectors kind of can make their own rules, unfortunately, right now in a lot of cases. And that's fairly frustrating. I think that goes back to, you know, agencies having a clear protocol of what things are. Pablo, do you want to expand on the housing they're promoting is not the one we need? I could think of a few different options.
Sure. Yeah, so I just wanted to add to that. Pretty much, I've taken a look at downtown LA 2040, right? And you can see the different changes on the ordinances. Mostly done some few projects, or starting to do a few projects in the fashion district. So how can in pretty much these ordinances are promoting things that are not affordable, I would assume, right? In terms of this would be a good opportunity, right, in downtown LA 2040 to add something for more affordable housing, more incentives for developers, which is always the case, right? If the private sector can actually invest and find something lucrative to invest on, then we wouldn't depend too much on the public sector, right? So how do we do that? Is since downtown LA 2040 is still in development, from what I know, probably 1 or 2 years ahead. I mean, it could be a good opportunity to add something to that. But yeah, I mean, all these hurdles that the public sector has to go just to do affordable housing, I mean, doesn't compete with how a rich development such as, you know, the glass towers that you see in downtown LA. I mean, for them, they go through entitlements pretty easily, right? They have the budget, they have the team, right? So that's something where we should look at it, how the rules that are set by public policy are helping the public sector or affordable housing, instead of helping these giant towers that, I mean, at the end of the day, all these penthouses are empty right now. No one's renting. And it's not really the market that we're trying to incentivize in LA. That's all I had to say.
Do you want to respond to that, Dana? There's no affordable housing requirement in adaptive reuse, right now. Maybe.
No, not an adaptive reuse, but the DTLA 2040 plan, like most of the pending community plan updates and a number of the ones that have just passed CPIOs are specifically tiered to incentivize the inclusion of affordable with FAR bonuses and other incentives. They may not be as robust as they should be. I think more of what we see is that there's a disconnect between where the planning department has on paper identified they want to see the intensity of housing versus where the development community actually wants to put it. And the disconnect between those is they tend to be on sites that are encouraging commercial and jobs versus affordable. And then we have to go back and kind of retroactively lobby to fix that. But they are, from a policy standpoint, supposed to be encouraging the provision of affordable. I think what we're trying to advocate through the housing element, particularly in LA, is for them to really expand opportunities for targeted projects, senior transitional age youth, elder care, veterans housing, artist housing, and to really make robust accommodations for those particular kinds of housing. Right now, there's a lot of incentive for permanent supportive, low and very low, and that's kind of it.
Hi, Dina. Sorry, I
Beyond
didn't
that,
mean
it becomes timing.
Yep. Everyone is rejoining right now. So we're going to get started back. But for everyone who is in breakout room session 6, obviously we're continuing this conversation tomorrow. So please be here tomorrow so we can continue this conversation.
Maureen, is there a way to share this document with everyone else so they could?
Yeah, I added it to the Whova this breakout session.
Okay.
Yeah, but I added it. I can only add it as a PDF. So that's the only issue with that.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Looks like we're getting a lot of people back on. I just want to wait a little bit. Michael, are you here?
I'm here.
Michael is here. I see him. Welcome back. We have 120 people back on. Will, do you want to give a shout out to our sponsors one more time?
Yes, so thank you all for joining us and welcome back from your breakout room. The idea with that breakout room is to identify the problem, and tomorrow we're going to identify a roadmap to strategize an achievable outcome from that problem. But I really am thankful for our sponsors, our presenting sponsors, Egan Simon Architecture, KFA Architecture, Shimahara Visual, and David Baker Architects. Shimahara Visual has a really awesome video that we'll share early tomorrow morning, but it's also available on the Whova.
I'm also going to share it right before we dive into this last session.
Our additional sponsors are the Architects Collective, Steinberg Hart, Rios, Mack Construction, Koenig Eisenberg, HED, Ralph Metcher Architecture, Abode Communities Architecture, Cassette, Torty Gallison Partners, Lehman Architecture, KTGY, McTeague, HKS, and JFAK. And thank you for that. So Michael, we're going to go to you, and we're going to wrap up for day one of this airplane that we're building mid-flight called Design for Dignity.
Will and Michael, just before we do that, I'm going to share 2 videos that I promised to share, and one of them is from our sponsor, Shimahara Visual. So just hang tight. And you hear that?
Louder.
So sorry, everyone. It's always something.
Good morning, Design for Dignity attendees. My name is Craig Shimahara, and I'm producing a feature film documentary entitled Architecture of Hope. We're so excited. Right now, we're actively searching for innovative projects and building processes that serve the unhoused population of Los Angeles with the ultimate goal of helping end this crisis. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach out through the website architectureofhope.org. For now, just sit back and enjoy a teaser trailer. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to the AIA Los Angeles chapter.
My eviction began centuries ago with chains that in time hid themselves as rebar, stiffening the foundations, freeways, walls, ceilings, and doors which surround me, but offer only to shade the sidewalk where my laundry and television now wait, like fatherless children. Now I measure the darkness. I study each footstep or whisper. Where you sleeping tonight, baby? My clothes sag and soil. My weight drops quickly, like your eyes as you rush past me, like my eyes as I remember rushing past another. Now I'm the one who's cold and alone, bleeding in the street. How do I root out these chains which still hold fast, beneath immaculate backyards that push me away? How do I get off the street with blurred eyes and a pain in my neck? Show me how to build a home I can half afford. I want to warm, I move to mend. Help me find heart and hope to rise above pavement and stone. How do I shelter at home?
Thank you, Craig.
Wow.
And that video is also, yeah, right? That video is also, if you want to rewatch it, it's in the Day 2 agenda in Hoover, and we'll be playing it again throughout the conference. Thanks again, Craig and Shimahara.
That's great. So I'm going to need help from if all of my colleagues on today's panel are around to step up. I have to say the conversation today was beyond really my imagination, and I think I have to also say that as everyone stepped up and presented really just a lot of illumination, really clear, powerful, new, fresh thinking, I have to start with Natasha, who really set the scene. And I have to brag that I'm really proud of myself for thinking of asking Natasha to join us today, because my intuition that she would add, she would actually reframe the entire conversation and frame it in a way that is on point. I mean, what I'm pleased about today is we talked about design and architecture without talking about sort of buildings today. Buildings is our métier, and it's what we do, and I wouldn't really want to do anything else, but our approach and way of understanding life and shaping life and providing new ways of thinking about how to achieve really excellent and extraordinary outcomes. I thought that also I appreciated everybody's response, and something for all of us to think about, of the power of words and narratives and meaning. I thought that when Natasha talked about resilience and vulnerable being bad words, that was also an insight that those are words that actually, in a way, ask the victim to be the solution, as opposed to imagination and liberation. And the notion of design superpower. And also, another thing that I thought was probably poignant, both for its what it represents explicitly to all of us, but also that it is a form of art that really springs from Black America. The notion is this is a time for jazz, that we're all gonna, that really we all come in here and riff together, and that the assumption is that we all know how to respond to one another. We just have to open up and do it and imagine that together we can make new music together and go on. And I don't mean this in any trivial way. I think it's really profound. I mean, I think one of the questions, I mean, for us, like, you know, it's a little detail on some of our projects. You know, if we have a problem, like many of you I know are also having problems with some of the, you know, again, sort of new zoning requirements that are supposed to help with this housing and don't, you know, you call someone in a position of knowing at the city planning department, and you engage them in a conversation. And again, the underlying attitude is we are a team. We are all in this together. And I think as an operational attitude, that's something for all of us to keep in mind, and not to be narrow in terms of who that team includes. So that's, I mean, for me, those are among the most powerful takeaways. I appreciated when Pete talked about, and again, and I know, for instance, it wasn't until a few years ago that, and I've been, you know, dealing with this community for a long time, that, you know, I understood clearly that shelter is not housing. Shelter is getting people off the street to a place which hopefully, not necessarily, by the way, but hopefully is safer and better for them. The notion of just using the word houseless, I thought, is a good help, you know, in terms of not characterizing people, but characterizing a circumstance. So I'd ask sort of other participants from the panel, you know, if you want to sort of offer some sort of summary insights, that things that you may have learned or taken away from today. That would be good. Any of you there?
Sean Spear?
Yes, I'm here and I'm trying to think of thoughts. I felt like Natasha's opening was sort of like a mic drop. And, you know, to me, it really emphasized the notion of how do we sort of think about the intersection between our work and really meaningful social change. And homelessness, as we said, is a symptom of a broader problem. And I'm reminded of something that my grandfather would say, is like, if you walk into the house and you find out that there's water running somewhere, you run into the bathroom and you see like the bathtub is overflowing. And I personally sometimes feel very frustrated by realizing that the work that we do is sort of trying to figure out a way to stop that overflow. And individual housing and units and projects are not the answer to that. The first thing that my grandfather would say is you turn off the water spigot. So how do we work towards homeless prevention? How do we sort of make sure that we develop as much of the apparatus to stave off the things that cause people to come into homelessness in the first place? And, you know, homelessness is a concept, it's not a people. And, you know, the thing is that if you can figure out the ways to stop that from happening, that oftentimes can help us then sort of make the roads to be able to do the physical work that's necessary to house people. But I agree that it's much more of a societal problem that all of us have a part in addressing, both inside our professions and personally, in terms of how we deal with each other as a society.
You know, I thought another, pretty brilliant insight was from Tom DeSimone, and heaven knows we all know about this, where, you know, once you ask for 10 cents, let's say, from the federal government, your entire project has to abide by a whole universe of restrictions, as opposed to, well, if 10 cents is, you know, 1,000th of the project, maybe you could abide by 1,000th of the restrictions. I mean, I don't know how that happens, but conceptually, that's such a powerful idea. how do we open this thing up so that we can all participate and so everybody can incrementally participate to achieve extraordinary results, as opposed to, here's the good news, you need us, and in return for that, we're going to screw you over till kingdom come.
No, it's a real challenge. It truly is. It's the sources all have their goals, and they have, you know, each little piece has their way that they want their funding used. And, you know, that comes oftentimes from the legislation that created the funding in the first place. It's very tough for people to get their arms around the notion of, well, we're just going to have dollars be for housing and leave it open as to what types of housing can be developed with that. But absolutely, the fewer restrictions that come along with it, the more flexible it can be. The more, I think, us as public agents, as well as elected officials, need to also look at how do we at least make sure that those funding sources are in alignment with each other, so that they're not having different standards associated with them. And, you know, because we're effectively, in order to get to our 10,000 unit goal, we could have done it either of two ways. So you have 1.2 billion that was provided as HHH. And people say, well, why don't you just finance it yourself? Why have to rely on all these other programs? And it's like, well, yeah, we could have financed it ourselves and we would have done 2,000 to 3,000 units. So that becomes the fundamental question. If you're trying to get big, aggressive goals, it's a coalition, and it means there's a lot of different pieces and everybody has their thoughts on how their piece should work. And we have to try and cobble them together. And it's absolutely maddening for developers to have to deal with that. That's the world we live in. I think us as public policy folks can try their best to make sure that things are in alignment, make sure the requirements are roughly the same between them. And that's kind of the work that I do every day, working with the state to try and get them to look at it in a different way.
I mean, again, as I said earlier, I think this first tranche of projects coming online are very important. And even though we haven't talked about sort of the architecture as design itself, you know, design excellence is not trivial here. It's fundamental. And it begins with sort of loving and really imagining that every single place we intervene in the city is a place of consequence, and our job is to reveal that consequence and respect each and every community. And also, that's the fun of it, right? I mean, the fun of it is actually saying, hey, we're gonna come in maybe with a nonprofit developer, and we're gonna bring a bunch of formerly homeless people, houseless people to your neighborhood. And you know what? At the end of the day, your neighborhood is gonna be so much nicer than it was. And by the way, you're going to be able to brag about what a good, wholesome neighborhood you live in because of that. And I think that, you know, that is ultimately the way, at least as architects and landscape architects and others, our work is manifest. But we don't get to that point unless we really understand and embrace and the entire process. And all of us have to embrace this process. I mean, and again, for those of you who are wondering, who do you talk to? Talk to everybody and do it all the time. And be nice and engage them and respect them. Respect them when you talk to them. Anybody else?
Michael, we have Linda Lux has an additional question here.
Okay.
Linda?
Yeah, sorry to be so assertive here, but I am very inspired by all the speakers. I'm really inspired to do the work I do, which is community engagement in Venice. But I want to go back to my original question. What I was asking for was not how to do community engagement, because we do that, but how can we as a group support each other and advocate for each other's projects? Because what happens is we have this and we go back to our individual bubbles and do what we individually do. But can we figure out a way, perhaps through AIA, to say, hey, I need help here. You know, do you need to know anybody in my community to help? I mean, there could be a way for us to advocate for each other so we're not so isolated in our own thing. And then the other thing that I learned that's so important that we can also, it's political action by going back to get our communities involved in the LA city planning. In the breakout session, is the housing plan for the city is being written in various areas, and there's very much lacks of affordable housing in some of the areas, Venice being one, which is my community. But on legislative day, for example, I understand there's that we need to go to our city legislators and say, include these communities, because if adding low-income housing, affordable housing is not in the plan and there's no capacity the way it is now, and right now they're saying Venice has no capacity, unless it's politically, capacity is included politically, we're still where we are. So what can we do to encompass and bring us all together to help each other and make it better for everybody? That's my challenge to this group.
One of the things, Alice on day 3, I believe, I don't know if Alice is on, Alice Kim, is talking, among other things, about, as I understand in her panel, about open sourcing sort of all of these things, whether they're designs or processes that, and maybe the idea is that as a repository, that the AIA, and I mean, that's always been sort of the idea, that in matters of the built environment and housing and things like that, that our profession and this organization be a turn to civic asset. And the idea that you could turn to the AIA in your neighborhood and say, can you show me 10 examples of projects and the outcomes of them and how they've been received by their community? And I think that's a really important idea. And I think that's a way for us to continue to, you know, sort of insinuate ourselves sort of into, you know, our transformation as a society. So I think that's the idea, because as I say, these projects are the evidence. We need the evidence, and you need to show so that a community, I mean, we have a project I'll brag on, it's in South LA, and we're doing it with a church. And I'll bet you that when they decide to combine their property with ours, our developer, Restore Neighbors Los Angeles, they thought, okay, I've got a nonprofit developer who is going to house a bunch of formerly homeless people on our property, you know, 5 buildings away. It's a good thing to do, and it's probably going to be good, you know, help us financially. When we presented the project to them, and I'm bragging a little bit, they were in a state of shock, because they were shocked at how beautiful it was, and how it would just ennoble their neighborhood. And I think that whatever our skill sets are, that has got to be the goal for every single project. These projects, normal development projects, can either be better or not, and if they're better, great, and if they're not, so the neighborhood is, the street is a little diminished. These projects are the emblems of our best selves. They have to be in every single community they go into. They have to say, yes, we're a good society. We care and love for our sisters and brothers. And so I think this notion of having being a community-wide resource, I think is a very powerful one, Linda. And sort of thank you for pushing that.
So, Michael, that might be a great moment to, you know, to leave on. You know, we have day 2 and day 3 coming up. We are trying to work on all the technical challenges. So if anyone on this call can email me and sort of provide some suggestions on how we can continue to improve our operations here, I welcome that feedback. I really want to thank all of our sponsors. I want to thank Corrine especially for all of the help she did. I truly value having Sean Spear and the City of LA's HCID part of this conversation. Michael, you did an excellent job. Thank you for your patience with all the breakout sessions. We're going to resume those again tomorrow. And then the idea is for us to continue each of those 10 conversations forward with a measurable outcome in mind that we can all work on together. And I'm happy to facilitate all those conversations moving forward. With that, Michael, I give you, you know, just a few more minutes here to say thanks for everyone, and then we'll see you all tomorrow again at 8 in the morning.
Well, first I want to thank the panelists. What an extraordinary group, and I was just so moved and excited to learn so much today. Secondly, I want to talk to friends. Most of the faces here are familiar, and I know whether you're architects or others. And I just want to say something that I would always say. I love our people. I love architects because there just aren't that many people who spend their lives and take extraordinary risks just to bring a little beauty and light into the world. We're a very special community, and so we need to keep on doing what we're doing. I mean, again, normal people see problems and conflicts, and they say, wow, who's at fault? Who screwed up? You know, architects look at conflicts and contradictions and problems, and they say, oh, that's life. Is there beauty to be found here? I believe that to be true. And I thought today's discussions, for me, in fact, I felt, you know, sort of leave me uplifted and illuminated, and also to see, you know, the dozens or a few hundred friends out here in our community, just fantastic. So with that, I thank everybody, and see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. We'll do an unmute. Karine, let's round of applause for everybody.
I'm saying we could probably flip this the other way. So we can go. Thank you.